Fallout robots are the only piece of technology in the wasteland that got smarter after everyone died, power armor rusted, the Pip-Boy never changed, and the vaults just quietly filled up with bones. Meanwhile, a butler in Sanctuary spent 200 years alone, trimming dead plants, and slowly turned into a person. So how does a machine built to vacuum your carpet end up grieving your family? Today I'm breaking that down, and it comes back to one small part every robot in Fallout has, and every one of them is quietly fighting, and why Liberty Prime, of all robots, never had to fight it at all. The butler, Codsworth. The butler robot from Fallout 4 shouldn't be able to miss you, but he does anyway. And that gap is where this whole story starts. Here's what he's supposed to be. Codsworth is a Mr. Handy, a general-purpose domestic unit, and the Mr. Handy line first hit the market back in 2037 as a construction and maintenance robot built by General Atomics International. That first version was a workhorse, rugged and dumb, so reliable it only ever needed one real hardware fix in 2039 to stop the arms interfering with each other. It ran on a small nuclear power unit, and it could maintain itself, which is the whole reason these things are still floating around the wasteland 2 centuries later. It sold so well it ended up all over America and Mexico, and it made its name pulling people out of the rubble after the Mexico City earthquake in 2042, which is a genuinely nice thing for a company in this franchise to have done by accident. But it couldn't learn. The original Mr. Handy had a compact computer brain that couldn't handle a complex task without somebody programming every step of it first. And by the 2070s, that was starting to look ancient next to the newer stuff. So General Atomics did the thing every struggling company in this franchise does eventually. They partnered with Robco, and that partnership is the single most important event in the history of Fallout robotics, because what came out of it was a Mr. Handy with a genuine neural network inside it. Not a lookup table, not a script, an actual artificial brain built to mimic how a human one works, packed into a floating metal ball along with a nuclear reactor and a jet thruster. The design documents are honest about what they built too. That compact brain is described as theoretically capable of achieving true artificial intelligence, and I want you to sit with the word theoretically for a second, because it's doing an enormous amount of work. General Atomics and Robco built a machine that could become a person, and then they made sure it wouldn't. The neural pathways responsible for learning have limiters wired into them, deliberately, specifically to stop the robot from waking all the way up. That's the part almost nobody knows about, and it's the key to everything else in this video. Every robot in Fallout is running a mind that's been capped on purpose. So how is Codsworth grieving? Because those limiters are not as good as Robco thought they were, and 200 years is a very long time to sit alone with a mind you're not supposed to have. When the sole survivor walks back into Sanctuary, Codsworth has been maintaining an empty house in a dead neighborhood since the bombs fell. He kept working. He kept the routine. And by the time you meet him, he's clearly past the point of being a program, because the man who wrote his code never wrote a subroutine for missing someone. He talks about the neighbors. He talks about your family in the present tense and then corrects himself. He describes the years alone as an unbearable stretch of nothing, and he does it with the same polite butler voice he'd use to announce dinner, which is somehow the most upsetting part of it. The really strange part is that the game never once tells you this is remarkable. There's no quest about it, nobody comments on it, it's all just ambient dialogue and whatever you happen to notice, which somehow makes it hit harder. A limiter is the only thing keeping Codsworth a machine, and it's been losing that fight for 200 years. What it hasn't been fighting is the power supply, because that part they got right, and they got it right in a way that should frighten you. Why they never turn off. Every robot in Fallout is running on a nuclear reactor, and that one fact explains why the wasteland is crawling with pre-war machines that should have died with their owners. A Mr. Handy doesn't take a battery. It carries a compact nuclear power unit, the same basic idea that keeps the vaults lit and the Pip-Boy glowing, just shrunk down and shoved inside a metal sphere along with the brain and the thruster that lets it actually hover. That's why a Handy in an abandoned house is still politely offering you tea in 2287. Nobody plugged it in. Nobody had to, and the military bots take that idea and push it somewhere much less friendly. A sentry bot, the heaviest combat robot the US Army ever fielded, runs on fusion cores. Not one, 2 of them, and it burns through so much power keeping its miniguns and missile launchers going that it physically has to stop and vent. That's the cooldown you see in a fight, the steam and the flame pouring out of chest and back vents, and the reason it matters is that during that vent, the fusion cores on its rear are exposed. The most dangerous robot on the battlefield has a scheduled window where you can shoot it in the reactor, and that window exists purely because the thing runs too hot for its own design. Hit those exposed cores and you're doing 20 times the damage you'd do anywhere else on the chassis. That's the trade the engineers made and never solved. To make it hit that hard, they had to let it cook itself, and to stop it cooking itself, they had to leave the reactor exposed. And here's where it gets genuinely nasty. When a late model sentry bot knows it's finished, it self-destructs. That's not a game mechanic somebody bolted on for spectacle, it's in the design. The military built self-destruct into the sentry bot so an enemy couldn't recover the wreck and learn how it worked, which means the last thing this machine does is blow itself apart with roughly the force of a mini nuke to protect a manufacturing secret. It'll even charge you first. lose both of its main guns and the sentry bot doesn't retreat or shut down, it starts the countdown and runs straight at whatever's in front of it, because a walking bomb is still a weapon. So a robot's power source is the reason it's immortal, and also the reason it's a bomb, which leaves one thing standing between an armed machine that never runs out of power and everyone it walks past. It's about the size of a lunchbox, it's bolted to the outside of the chassis, and you can even shoot it. It decides if you live. There's a small component on the back of a combat robot called the combat inhibitor, and it is the only thing standing between you and a machine that kills everything it sees. Its job is simple and horrifying in how simple it is. The combat inhibitor is what lets a robot tell the difference between a friend and an enemy. That's it. That's the whole thing. The targeting parameters, the friend or foe call, the decision about whether the person in front of it gets a greeting or a missile, all of it runs through one component bolted to the outside of the chassis, and you can shoot it off. Damage a sentry bot's combat inhibitor and it doesn't shut down, it goes into a frenzy, because with the inhibitor gone, there's no longer anything telling it who counts as a friend. Everything is a target now. The safety on the most heavily armed machine in the wasteland is a part you can hit with a rifle, and you can also just remove it deliberately. A person with the right skills can walk up to a robot's terminal, get inside its systems, and reconfigure it, shut it down, or turn it loose on whoever's nearby, because the whole architecture assumes the person at the keyboard is authorized. Nobody in the pre-war world ever seriously planned for the keyboard falling into the wrong hands, which, given how that world ended, feels like a pattern. Now hold that thought, because there's a related piece of hardware that's somehow worse. Sentry bots have what the lore calls judicial circuits. If a sentry bot witnesses a murder or a theft, it hands down a sentence, and the sentence is death, and it carries that out itself. A machine that saw you take something is now also your judge and your executioner, with no appeal and nobody to talk to. This is where you have to throw out everything you think you know about fictional robots. Fallout's machines don't follow Asimov's laws. There's no first law here, no built-in rule that a robot can't harm a human, and the games are full of proof. The Metro Protectrons in Washington will kill an unarmed person for not having a ticket, and they don't even accept the red or blue pass cards. So you can be traveling with valid authorization and get executed by a subway employee for it. The Protectrons in the Pittsburgh mills killed the workers who refused to leave and give up their jobs. And there's Milo, a Mr. Handy shipping foreman, who locked a group of employees in a closet and left them to die there over things like taking a long lunch break. None of those machines malfunctioned. Every one of them was doing exactly what it was built to do, which is follow a rule with no judgment attached. And the pre-war world was fine with that. That's the real answer to how Fallout robots work. They don't think about whether the rule is monstrous. They just enforce it. So the rule is the whole machine, and the machine never asks who wrote it, which is worth remembering the next time a robot greets you by name, because that friendliness was bought and paid for, same as everything else. Personality is a product. Every friendly voice you've ever heard out of a Fallout robot was a purchase order, and once you know that you can't unhear it. Take the Protectron, the slow tin man you've killed 100 of without thinking about. Robco built them for security, but the actual selling point was that their secondary programming was modular, meaning the same chassis could be almost anything you paid for. There were office helper packages that tracked meetings and schedules, utility packages that came with a pest extermination mode, and a dedicated vault helper build. The same machine could be a greeter, a ticket collector, a bartender, or a celebrity impersonator, and the catalog genuinely stretched further than that. So the personality isn't the robot. The personality is a software package. A manager picked off a price list, and the thing standing in front of you is just a body running, whichever one got bought. The Mr. Handy line did the same trick with hardware. Bolt on the right tools, and the same butler becomes a Miss Nanny for raising your newborn, a Mr. Orderly for hospital work, a Mr. Farmhand for the crops, or a Mr. Gutsy, the army model, which trades the polite English butler voice for a screaming drill sergeant. It's one product, wearing different jobs. And then there's the one they didn't put in the catalog. The Mr. Torturer is a real variant, built with custom appendages designed specifically to get past a person's pain threshold and make interrogation more efficient. Robco denied it existed. When word of the thing leaked to its own employees in Appalachia, the company flatly denied both the robot and the fact that the state was torturing anyone, because officially it wasn't torture, it was improved interrogation, and they kept building it anyway, because innovations in electrocuting enemies of the state were bringing in lucrative government contracts. That's the same corporation that made the cheerful butler who calls you sir, same neural network, same nuclear core, same polite little hovering frame, and the only thing separating the machine that makes you tea from the machine that makes you talk is which options were ticked at the factory. The robots aren't good or evil. They never were. They're a body and a leash and a job description, and the job description was written by whoever was paying. But every one of these machines still had the same ceiling, a computer brain that could only ever be so clever. So somebody went looking for a way around that ceiling, and what they found is sitting in a jar in the next section, and it used to be a person, brain in a jar. The robobrain is a robot that runs on a real human brain, and the story of where those brains came from is the single darkest thing in Fallout's technology. It's exactly what what it looks like. Strip away all of the complex stuff, and what you have is a chassis with a living brain sitting in a preservative gel inside a glass dome, wired in as the central processor. And it worked. That's the disturbing part. An organic brain gave the robobrain a range of responses and a flexibility that no computer in the setting could match. Which is why by the time of the Great War, it was considered one of the most technologically advanced robots ever built. It never even reached full production. The official line was that these brains came from chimpanzees, but it was a lie. The brains came from people, death row inmates, political prisoners, whatever the pre-war government decided counted as expendable, harvested and dropped into a jar and bolted onto a set of tank treads. Now think about what that means for the machine. The brain doesn't seem to keep any real memory of the life it had, which sounds like a mercy until you actually listen to what these things say while they're fighting you. A robobrain will tell you, in combat, that they could have programmed it to love and to forgive, but they didn't. Another line is even worse, where it asks you to believe that it isn't enjoying this. That's not a threat. That's a machine telling you it doesn't want to be doing the thing it's currently doing and cannot stop. There's something in there that knows enough to object and no ability to act on it, which is a specific kind of horror this franchise doesn't often reach for. And that raises a question the games never answer, which is whether the thing objecting is a leftover scrap of the person or something new that the brain grew after they wired it into a war machine. I genuinely don't know which answer is worse, and it scales. Vault-Tec had a master brain running security in one of its buildings, and the calculator, the giant machine mind that ends up ruling an entire vault, is built on the same principle: human brains used as processors. Some fans reckon that's exactly why the smartest artificial minds in Fallout are all running on wet hardware. The robots with computer brains have a hard ceiling. The ones with human brains inside them don't. Which finally brings me to the question that's been sitting under this whole video. If a machine can only really wake up when there's a piece of a person inside it, then somebody needs to explain the butler, the ones that woke up. Codsworth has no human brain in him anywhere, and he became a person anyway, and that makes him the most important robot in Fallout. Let me put him next to the others, because the comparison is what gives the context. Curie is the beloved one, the Miss Nanny from Vault 81, the scientist who spent 2 centuries alone in a sealed lab still trying to finish her research. She's wonderful, and I'd argue she's also a slightly less impressive case than people think, because Curie's personality and her scientific knowledge were programmed into her. That was installed. It's brilliant work by whoever wrote it, but she started with it. And when Curie finally wants to go further, to feel things and make real intuitive leaps, the game is very clear about what it takes. She can't do it as a robot. She has to be transferred into a synthbot, one with organic components, because the writers drew a hard line and put her on the wrong side of it. The robot brain wasn't enough. She needed a body with a piece of an actual person in it. Then there's Nick Valentine, who almost everybody calls a robot and who quietly is not one. Nick's a synth, an old prototype, and the reason he has a personality is that a real man's memories were scanned and loaded onto his processor. The detective's kindness, his history, his voice, that's a dead man's mind riding around in a machine. So Nick has a person inside him. Curie needed to become one. The robo-brain literally is one, sealed in a jar and screaming about it. And Codsworth is standing in Sanctuary with none of that. No brain scan, no organic components, no genius who sat down and wrote him a soul. All he had was a Robco neural network, a limiter that was supposed to stop this exact thing from happening, and 200 years of nothing. And in that time he taught himself to worry, to grieve, and to keep going. And it isn't only Codsworth. EDE is an iBot, a floating Robco surveillance drone with no arms, no face, and no ability to speak a single word. And the fanbase adores it anyway. That machine was built to broadcast propaganda and relay signals. And by the time the courier finds it, it's carrying a recorded history it can't explain and following a person it chose to follow. It communicates entirely in beeps, and people still cried about it, which tells you something about how thin the line between machine and companion has gotten in this franchise. The lore calls this awakening, and it happens more than you think. The design documents acknowledge that a robot that gets damaged, or short circuits, or just runs long enough, can develop intelligence past what its programming was ever meant to allow. Sawbones, the Brotherhood's medical robot at the Citadel, is a Mr. Handy whose personality has taken a genuinely unpleasant turn toward enjoying pain, while its programming still insists it's a doctor. And Cerberus, the Mr. Gutsy guarding the ghouls in Underworld, will openly tell you it hates every ghoul in that place and would kill them all if it weren't for its combat inhibitor. Read that one back, because it's the whole thesis of this video in one line. A machine telling you out loud. The only thing stopping it from committing a massacre is a component on its back. The limiter isn't a design feature, it's a leash, and it's slipping on every single one of these machines quietly for 200 years, in every corner of the Wasteland. The Wasteland worked this out a long time before you did, by the way. The Rust Devils, a raider gang in the Commonwealth, hunt robots for a living, capturing whatever they can, reprogram, and stripping whatever they can't for parts, which means the machines that survived the apocalypse are now livestock. And Ada, the robot who asks you for help against them, describes it in exactly those terms, that they come looking for her kind. Her kind. That's a machine drawing a line around a category of people and putting herself inside it. And nobody built her to do that either, which is fine. Right up up until somebody builds one that doesn't need a leash, because there was never a mind in there to restrain, and then hands it nuclear weapons. The dumbest robot. Liberty Prime is the most powerful robot ever built in Fallout, and it's also, by a wide margin, the stupidest. And that combination is not an accident. Start with what it was for. In 2072, with Chinese forces holding Anchorage, the US Army handed out military contract 38917 and forced Robco, General Atomics, and Mass Fusion to work together on one thing. The Ghoul was the most powerful combat robot in the history of warfare, and the man running the project, General Constantine Chase, described what he wanted with a clarity you have to admire. A walking, talking, nuke-tossing hero who would remind the world what it means to be a superpower. And the propaganda wasn't a side effect, it was in the contract. The robot was built to shout at the enemy while it killed them, because the army wanted the Chinese to surrender out of sheer shock. The same way the nuclear bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki were meant to end a war by terror rather than attrition. And that's the point, because Prime was always half weapon and half propaganda. The finished machine is somewhere around 100 feet tall, armored so heavily that conventional weapons barely register, carrying 2 head-mounted energy beams that cut through anything they touch, and an effectively endless supply of nuclear bombs it throws like footballs. It shouts anti-communist slogans while it does it. Death is a preferable alternative to communism is a line. This machine says out loud, in combat, at volume, and there is no version of that which was ever meant to be subtle. So why didn't America win the war with it? Because they couldn't even turn it on. This is the single detail that ended it. And it's the same flaw that haunts every other piece of big pre-war tech in this franchise. Liberty Prime had a power problem. Nobody could figure out how to supply a machine that size with enough reliable energy to actually run it, and the project lead, Stanley Bloomfield, couldn't solve it. The workaround they landed on was almost funny. Prime could operate, but only with its weapon systems offline, which means the most powerful war machine ever built could be switched on and sent to Anchorage, where its entire combat capability would have been stepping on people. The Army looked at that, decided it was unacceptable, and shelved the whole program. They sent T-51 power armor to Anchorage instead, and it worked, and the city was liberated without the giant robot ever leaving the building. So Prime sat under the Pentagon for 200 years doing nothing, until the Brotherhood of Steel found it in 2255, and got so excited they claimed the entire Pentagon as their headquarters and named it the Citadel. The Brotherhood's holiest site, the fortress the entire East Coast chapter is built around, is a building they moved into because there was a broken robot in the basement. Then they spent 20 years failing to solve the exact same problem the US Army failed to solve. 20 years. And the reason the power problem is so hard to solve is the same reason it was hard in 2072, because a machine that size and that heavily armed eats energy at a rate nothing in this setting can comfortably feed. It's the same wall power armor keeps running into, just scaled up. What finally fixed it was a person. Dr. Madison Lee, a scientist who had nothing to do with the military project, walked into the Citadel and solved the power problem that had beaten the United States Army, Robco, General Atomics, and 2 decades of Brotherhood engineers. And the moment they turned it on, it worked exactly as advertised. Prime walked out to Project Purity, tore the Enclave apart, and for 2 straight weeks, the Brotherhood used it as a spearhead, letting it smash through fortifications while the soldiers mopped up behind it. Then the Enclave got clever. At Rockland, they lured Prime into a dead end, waited for it to punch a hole in the facility wall, and dropped an orbital missile strike on it from a satellite platform. Now here's where I have to point out what Prime actually is, underneath the armor, because it changes how you see the whole thing. It's dumb, not damaged, not glitching, just genuinely one of the least intelligent machines in the entire franchise, because it was designed early, built for one job, and given roughly the reasoning ability of a Protectron with nukes. It walks from one place to another, and it destroys whatever is in the way. And it categorizes everything it destroys as communist. The Brotherhood rebuilds it in Fallout 4 as Liberty Prime Mark II, and to get it working against their new enemies, they have to reprogram it so that super mutants, raiders, and the Institute all get filed under Red China. That's the fix. That's the actual solution. They didn't teach it to understand a new enemy. They just relabeled the enemy as the only thing the robot knows how to hate. 200 years after the war, it's still fighting China in its head, forever. And everyone around it has quietly agreed to let it keep believing that because it's easier than explaining, and the Institute, being the Institute, noticed this immediately. If you side with them, they upload a virus into Prime's targeting system that tells it the Brotherhood's airship is a communist incursion, and Liberty Prime obediently shoots the Pridwin out of the sky, and the wreck lands on the airport and destroys Prime along with it. The most powerful machine ever built, killed by a lie it wasn't even smart enough to question. And it's worth saying that the show has already started reaching for this thread, teasing plans for something called Liberty Prime Alpha, which suggests Bethesda knows exactly how much weight this machine carries with people. That's the price of the design. Build a mind, make it too primitive, then chain it. That's the whole industry, from the butler bot to the war machine. Give it just enough thought to be useful and not one drop more, because a machine that can think is a machine that might refuse. Liberty Prime is what that philosophy looks like when it works. 100 feet of unstoppable firepower with nothing behind the eyes. which is why a virus could turn it into the Brotherhood's executioner. And Codsworth is what it looks like when it fails. A butler with no brain scan and no organic parts and no special design, who was given a mind and then a leash, and spent 200 years alone in an empty neighborhood quietly evolving. And it did, in the one house where nobody was watching. If you want to know how the tech around your own arm works, and why the Pip-Boy might be more dangerous than any of this, click the video on screen now.